He was afraid that the churches in cities across the empire might grow narrow and be simply interested in their own little affairs. So his first plan was to give them a work to do for other people far away from themselves. He meant to set them all to collect money for the help of the poor who were in Jerusalem. This would do great good to the churches who gave the money, by widening their outlook, giving them a more imperial vision, and the feeling that they belonged to a great church which embraced all who held the faith in the unity of the Spirit. It would also greatly stir the hearts of the people in Jerusalem, who were in danger of feeling that the far-off churches were hardly truly Christian, to receive a gift from those in the far-flung battle line of Paul's missionary adventure. That was the first plan in the far-seeing brain of Paul, who was a statesman, a wise master builder, as well as an heroic pioneer. Another great ambition of Paul at this time, one that he knew might cost him his life, as indeed it did, was to carry his gospel into the very heart of the Roman Empire, that is, to occupy the very center of the world of his day, Rome. To bring into being a church that felt itself to be one throughout the whole empire and with a center at the capital of the empire itself — that was the daring, the tremendous scheme of the wise and undaunted master builder. It was now summer. Paul wished to carry out part of his first plan before winter set in, and at the same time to fulfill his promise to his friends at Ephesus. He therefore left Antioch and went out once more across the Orontes, with his feet on the open road and his face toward the mountain heights. Simeon and some of the others would be sure to go out the first miles of the road with him. But as the men of Antioch waved their farewells to Paul and took their last look at the sturdy figure as he rode his ass along the paved way, they would not know that they would never look on him again. From dawn to dark he rode, leaving the great Mount Sulpius behind him, passing now the shore of a lovely lake and there a stream running down from the Amanus mountains. He would talk by the wayside with the leaders of the camel caravans that swung along the great road up the now deepening gorges of the mountains and through the dark shadows of the Syrian gates, the paths that led into his own native Cilician plain. Along the great road — it was the ancient road down which Alexander the Great himself had come with his armies — Paul travelled till he rode across that bridge from which as a boy he had watched the boats go down to the harbour of Tarsus. Here, and among the other churches of the plains, he spoke to the Christian folk, strengthening their courage and helping them to meet the arguments of their enemies. He went along the old streets down which he had run as a boy to school, and would see the booth where he had sat at the loom and had thrust his first needles through the goat's hair tent canvas. Then Paul turned his back on Tarsus and went out northward across the plain to the Taurus mountains. As the traveller rested the ass at the foothills and gazed back down the road to the roofs and orchards of Tarsus, and saw the silver ribbon of the river curving down to the harbour, he took his last look at that no mean city, whose chief glory after all is not that Alexander the Great bathed in its river, or that Antony entertained Cleopatra in its palace, or that Athenodorus taught in its university, but that Paul himself was born within its walls. So Paul passed forever from that plain up the Cilician Pass, where the tinkle of the camel bells and the music of the mountain stream filled the grey gorges. Paul climbed up and on by the Roman post road till he passed through the shadow of the Cilician gates, out onto the high tableland of Cappadocia. He came out on to the dry road on which the summer sun shimmered, and the very camels were glad to get out of the rays of the noonday under the shelter of a wayside inn. He reached Derbe, going in by the gate through which some 3 years earlier he and Silas had entered. Here, as everywhere on this journey, he told the Christian folk of the needs of the poor of the church in Jerusalem, and they promised their gifts. So he passed from Derbe at dawn, when the sun threw the long shadow of the mountain of black rock along the path that he was to follow up the low hills. Through the day he walked till he reached the bridge near which the oxen quenched their thirst at sunset in the shallow stream that ran over its bed round the Acrolystra. At Lystra, we can well believe, Grandmother Lois and her daughter Eunice would want to know all the adventures that had fallen to their boy Timothy. They would be proud to hear how he helped Paul, carrying his cloak, writing his letters and bearing them to far-off cities, facing the scourge and the rods, and the peril of sea and land for Paul's sake and for the gospel. Starting from Lystra, perhaps before dawn, to get as much journeying as possible done before the midsummer sun was high in the heavens, Paul took the caravan road over the low ridge of hill country and down to where the gushing river from the mountain watered the orchards and cleansed the homes of Iconium. The orchard farmers of Iconium would be busy scaring the birds from the growing fruit, in the days when Paul cheered the church there with stories of the wonderful victories their Lord had won in the cities of East and West. So he passed on his unresting travel, and though the grey was now beginning to tinge Paul's beard and his hair, and the fiery sun made journeying a toil, and though friends desired him to stay and warned him how the brigands of the Pisidian mountains lay in wait ahead, Paul never stayed his course. The fire of his passion for the Christ whom he had met on that blazing day on the road to Damascus so many years ago burned on him always. Let no man think that sudden in a minute all is accomplished and the work is done. Though with thine earliest dawn thou shouldst begin it, scarce were it ended in thy setting sun. Paul could, never at even, pillowed on a pleasure, sleep with the wings of aspiration furled. So with staff and water bottle and mat bed, and with his satchel stuffed with fruits and cheese and bread, he got out on to the road again, till he once more joined in the new military Roman road that led him to Pisidian Antioch, where the aqueduct brought the water from the mountains in whose gorges the robbers hid. Paul's friends there would remember how Barnabas and he had first come to them from the fever-stricken Pamphylian plain 5 years before, and they would be full of joy at seeing him now for the third, although it was the last, visit among them. We do not know what he said to them, but he would be likely to say things as he was leaving them, like those great words that he wrote to these churches of Galatia later on. "Brothers, you were called to be free. Only do not make your freedom an opening for the flesh, but serve one another in love. For the entire law is summed up in one word: you must love your neighbor as yourself. Whereas, if you snap at each other and prey upon each other, take care in case you destroy one another. I mean, lead the life of the Spirit, then you will never satisfy the passions of the flesh. The harvest of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, good temper, kindliness, generosity, fidelity, gentleness, self-control. Make no mistake, a man will reap just what he sows. He who sows for his flesh will reap destruction from the flesh, and he who sows for the Spirit will reap life eternal from the Spirit. Never let us grow tired of doing what is right, for if we do not faint, we shall reap our harvest at the proper season." Paul's friends would go with him through the western gate with the dawn at their backs, as he set out on the last great part, and in some ways the most dangerous part, of this journey. At the beginning his road lay on the track that Timothy and Silas had trodden with him 3 years earlier. He was on the great Roman road. Down from the northeast and across this Roman road came the trade road, along which the camels brought the fruits and silks of the plateau to Ephesus or the Aegean coast. Paul was going to Ephesus, but he did not take this safer caravan route with its regular inns and companionship. He struck ahead on the hillier and more dangerous road, where fewer men went, and he travelled straight for Ephesus. Up and down the hills and dales of Asia he passed, gradually dropping from the tableland to the river valleys, crossing the streams that ran from the hills to the Meander River, then over the moorland to the upper waters of the Caistor. Down the valleys of the Caistor from highland to lowland he rode, only drawing bridle for needed rest and shelter at noontide and at night. For the autumn was drawing on, the vineyards were purple with grapes, and the olives hung thick on the trees. The cries of the harvesters sounded on the hillsides, and the laughter of the maidens as they trod the grapes with their bare feet in the winepress. At last one day, as Paul came round a curve in a valley, he felt a fresh breeze on his cheek, and saw a blue gleam on the horizon. The word of the soldiers of Greece when they saw the Euxine would leap to his lips: Thalassa, Thalassa, the sea, the sea. Before him, like a map unrolled, lay the mouth of the Caistor, the shining marble temples and theatre and stadium of Ephesus, and on the edge the harbour with its still masts and crowded shipping. Only that very spring he had sailed from that harbour out into the Great Sea, and had braved the storms of March to worship at Jerusalem at the feast. He had gone over mountain pass and plain and plateau, had seen 1,000 faces lighten at his coming, and had quickened to new courage hearts that were failing in facing hard tasks. Now he had to face the battle afresh in this new city, but he did not quail or tire. Yes, without cheer of mother or of daughter, yes, without stay of father or of son, lone on the land and homeless on the water, pass I in patience till the work is done. His pace would quicken, and as he entered the great Smyrna gate of Ephesus he would look eagerly for the familiar faces of Aquila and Priscilla. End of chapter 25.